Hello everyone. So today we are going to talk about the Aryan invasion or migration theory or the out of India theory as some would like to argue for, um, which is basically a set of theories which talk about the relationship of languages between India and Europe and how this happened in the past. So primarily in the prehistory, how these two regions came about to be speaking a related set of languages. There has been new research that has been coming out in this area recently, and there has been a lot of press coverage about it, and then a lot of controversy, which has been going on for a very long time, decades, even centuries of controversy regarding this entire topic. Um, as this is a prime area of my interest, and I've been following this entire debate for quite some time. I thought that I would make a video and just lay out some of the basic facts, that are out there and just reduce the amount of confusion that people have about this whole topic, and especially about this new archaeogenetics related research that has been coming out in the recent months or years, probably last decade or so, I would say. Um, okay. Uh, I'm making this video in English for now because I think there would be a diverse set of audience that would like to listen to this particular uh, topic. So I'm just making this one in English. I can make one in Hindi if I get much traction for this particular video. So starting on the topic itself. So how was this theory started or came about? What were the origins? So if you go back into the origins of how this whole thing came about and the very genesis of this argument about an Aryan invasion, so-called Aryan invasion into India, which is the harbinger of the Rigvedic culture and then the future Vedic civilization and the rest of it. It all happened uh, in the 18th and 19th century. So when the Europeans started coming into India, they gradually realized, and as they studied the texts of Indians, they gradually realized that the old languages of India, primarily Sanskrit, which was one of the oldest languages in India, um, was in very close connection with their own classical languages like Latin and Greek. So they found similarities between these languages. And at one point, they realized that they must have a common source. And that is how the whole genesis of this theory was laid down. And then following from there, um, the branch of linguistics formed, which if you guys don't know, linguistics was founded. The modern study of linguistics was founded by a guy named Ferdinand de Saussure, who was a Sanskrit professor, and he derived his whole set of arguments or his whole set of his study of languages from Panini's grammar. So he read Panini's grammar, and from there on he developed the set of rules. Like he delved into this whole study of how languages change over time and how they relate to each other. And that was all based on Panini's study of Sanskrit and his treatise on that. So that is how they started this whole field of linguistics, and then it developed into much more, and then it encompassed a wide range of studies revolving around languages, their formations, their interrelatedness, and so on. So uh, that is what caused this entire argument about Sanskrit, Latin, Greek, and other European languages and modern Indian languages like Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, and all, and how they relate to each other. So one of the guys who is one of the principal, what to say, who laid the foundations for this theory, uh, was Max Muller. He was a. Let me just go to the page. Okay. So Max Muller was a philologist. He was an Orientalist, which means that he was involved in the study of the places, Asian cultures like India, and basically primarily India. He was involved in Indian studies, and he read the Sanskrit texts, and they had a very racial kind of understanding in those times. So Max Muller himself, uh, he was a devout Christian, and many of his theories were based on his understanding of the world as a Christian, which also involved, on things like the world started at 4000 BC or something like that. So from there he derived his theories that okay, the world started at 4000 BC, and he talks in one of his writings, he talks about the Tower of Babel, which is like a mythology where they say that all the world languages, basically all the people split from there and started speaking uh, different languages. So he fit his entire premise in using those sort of theories and understanding of the world. And from there he said, okay, the languages started spreading at 4000 and they spread. Uh, this branch went to Europe, this branch went to Asia, and finally Sanskrit came to India around 1500 BC probably. And his date for Rig Veda is 1500 BC, which we follow till now in all academia and all the textbooks that are taught in India and elsewhere. So he gave this date of 1500 BC for Rig Veda, and it's not based on anything, like it's not a very scientific way of arriving at that date. He just gave that date based on a very rudimentary analysis that okay, he said that all the Vedic and Upanishad text are pre-Buddha. So he gave a certain amount of time for each book, each Vedic book that was done before Buddha, and then he gave arbitrary timelines to them that okay, 200 years for um, each Upanishad, and then this much time for each Vedic Samhita, and he just went back from there, and he ended up at the date of 1500, and he said, okay, this is the date when the Rig Veda was transmitted. So you have to remember that at that time when Max Muller was talking about these things, there was no Indus Valley civilization known to the people because they had not found out about Harappa and Mohenjo-daro yet, and they didn't know anything about this existing civilization in India. So they just came up with this theory that okay, India was a very rudimentary tribal sort of society, and Max Muller said that okay, and these folks who brought Sanskrit with them, um, they brought all this current Indian culture and all, and they taught the natives about all this, and that's how this theory was formed, and that's the basically the crux of the theory. So primarily from the European point of view, from where I see it, it is more about finding out their own roots. So it's the European folks looking for their own past, and which they are trying to find in these old Sanskrit texts that they found in India. So they are trying to relate to their past by reading Indian texts because they know that they are somehow related, and that somehow related is then they are taking a jump from there and they are trying to relate it to their own past. So the thing over here is that for Northern Europe, especially Northern Europe, and probably to some extent Eastern Europe as well, uh, they don't have very much of their prehistory recorded anywhere. Like for Greeks and Latin folks, Romans and Greeks, they at least have some ancient civilization and that sort of culture to fall back upon, which they can relate to, and which actually the rest of the Europe claims as their own, but it's actually a Southern European culture which later spread out into Northern Europe. But the prehistory of Northern Europe, we don't know actually what sort of culture. We don't know much about it. So let to put it that way, we don't know that much about it as we know about the Greek and Latin cultures. So anyways, these guys were trying to look for their own past, and from there it went into a sort of an identity search for the Europeans, and ultimately it took a very racial kind of turn where they said, okay, these folks, since they covered this much area, and let's look at the expanse of these Indo-European languages and the family of languages which comprises of Indo-European. So if you look at this map, this is the spread of these related languages. So it's English, uh, Spanish, German, Italian, Persian, and of course Indian languages. They all are a related set of languages. And I will not go into, I'm not a big believer of all these linguistic theories that do the rounds everywhere, that they group them into, they make trees about it. There are trees, linguistic trees, where they say that okay, this language was formed at this point in time, and they have hypothesized about an uh, a pre-existing language before all of these languages were split into different ones, and they gave it a name, Proto-Indo-European. So they call these languages Indo-European because one end of these languages is India and the other end is Europe. So they just collectively call them Indo-European languages, the two extremes of these languages. And then they came up with this hypothesized language based on their linguistic theories and rules, which, according to me, is sort of a pseudoscience, because there are no limitations to what rules they can form. They just come up with some arbitrary rules and laws, linguistic laws, which then decide, so basically, you can justify anything that you want to justify in the field of language. Not everything, but still you have a great deal of flexibility of playing around. So it's not a very hard science. But anyways, they came up with this Proto-Indo-European languages, a Proto-Indo-European language, which is the ancestral language of all these languages, and it's a hypothetical language. And from there they say that these languages split into all these different languages, and that's where we stand today. And in that they place they place the split for the Indian set of languages, which means Sanskrit and its daughter languages. They call them Indo-Aryan. And this term Aryan basically is coming from the same Sanskrit literature. They found that in the Vedic text, people used to call themselves Arya, whoever were there, the people who were writing down the Vedic texts, or basically orally transmitting the Vedic texts, were calling themselves Aryas, which means noble people or gentlemen and that sort of thing. It was not a racial thing for the people who were writing down or creating those compositions, but the Europeans and the early philologists who were studying the Indian texts and these things, they concentrated it. They basically formed it as um, a racial theory, and they started saying that okay, there were these people called Aryans who called themselves Aryans, and they somehow came and captured India and spread this whole thing here, and then they were so strong and powerful and advanced and all that, that they captured, see, such a big area. So those same people who captured India, their relatives basically captured the rest of Europe and the other Asian places like Iran as well. So they were a very powerful set of folks, and so the racial theory then took a very bad turn, and the Nazis also took inspiration from that, and that's how this Nazi Aryan inspiration came about. Primarily the doing of German Indology. So German Indology is like Indology is basically a set of is a field of study created primarily to study things related to India, basically Indian culture and things related to that, and it's a very uh, sort of a deeply rooted racial kind of a racist kind of a field, I would say. So it has very racist connotations to that whole branch of study, and it has been there have been books in recent years who have exposed this entire gamut of German Indology and also other Indology like the American one as well. But the primary culprit in this whole thing is German Indology. So if you see this book by Vishwad Luri and Joydeep Bagchi, Vishwad Luri, who is a researcher in Hunter College in New York, is a professor there. So he and Joydeep Bagchi have written this very wonderful book called The Nay Science, uh, which basically lays out how this whole um, understanding of the text, the Indian text, is basically corrupt, and it doesn't follow any principles or logic when it is talking about these texts, because they're primarily saying that you are okay, you are taking the Indian text and you are taking it from the tradition. Tradition means the gurus or the mutts or the Brahmins, whoever were reciting these texts orally over generations. So they took these texts from them, the Vedic texts, and the other texts as well, like the Mahabharata. They primarily took Mahabharata as a case in this book, but uh, they show that they take these texts and then they bring in their own interpretation of these texts, just putting aside the entire interpretation that the tradition is offering. So they take the text as it is from the tradition, but they don't take uh, the description of those texts, the commentary on those texts, the understanding that the tradition has towards those texts. They just discard all of that, and then they bring in all these theories from their side to explain away these texts, and they start looking for layers in these texts, that okay, this Mahabharata, it has a core layer of an Aryan sort of group fighting for supremacy, and that's the core of the thing. And then they'll try to look for that same sort of Aryan past and that Aryan uh, theory that they had theorized 200 years ago, and they try to find out layers in these texts, and they try to say, okay, this part is the Aryan part, and then the rest of it is added by later era Brahmins, and then that made this whole text what it is today. So they, try to corrupt in their own way the Indian text, and then which causes a lot of issues. So people have been appreciating this work done by Vishwa Adluri and Jyoti Bagchi. I highly recommend this book for anybody who is interested in understanding how this whole field of study is so biased and so crooked. So if you want to know that, you must read this book. Okay, going forward. So the Aryan invasion theory, or the Aryan migration theory, as they call it now, what are they arguing for as of now? So the argument presented for a very long time was that somewhere around here, or the steppe theory as we call it today, the steppe theory for the origin of the Indo-European people. Let me just describe it in brief what they mean by that, by the steppe theory. Okay, so what they mean by the steppe theory is that somewhere around this place between the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, and just on top of these two seas, and above this area is the Caucasus Mountains. So this mountain range is known as the Caucasus, and the word Caucasian or Caucasoid features and all, it derives from this mountain range. So they say that, the basically present day Indians and even all the Europeans, they have Caucasoid features, um, which distinct from the other people, like the Chinese or the East Asians. So they have Asian features. So similarly, the features that we share is our Caucasoid features. So what they are saying is that there were a set of people who were living in this area, this Ukraine to southern Russian area, which goes into Kazakhstan. And I'm just giving a very, very broad outline of what that theory is. And they're saying that they were cattle herders, and they ultimately domesticated the horse, and they invented the wheel and stuff like that, at least the spoked wheels. And they used all of that to travel long distances, and ultimately they came to this end, and this whole area is known as the steppes. From here to here, it's like a mountainless flatland, grassland basically. And then they are saying that they came across this whole area up to Kazakhstan, and from there, today's Kazakhstan, and then from there they came down into India, and that's how they spread over here, and that's how this language group, the Sanskrit language and its associated things and culture, spread into India. Whereas another branch went to the west, and they spread the culture over here into Western Europe and elsewhere, Greece and all. Uh, so this is a bit distinct from what, the earlier Europeans, or at least the Nazis and the German folks, were believing, that, they were saying that the entire center lies somewhere in Western Europe. And from Western Europe, it all spread into, the rest of the world and into India. But this theory is a bit distinct. It is saying that it is starting here in the steppes, and from here it is going into India and elsewhere. So that's the steppe theory in a nutshell. It started it. So what I would like to clarify here is that it's basically a linguistic theory. It's about spread of languages. Okay, and a set of ideas that come along with that language, but it is not in essence and in practicality it is not just languages, because it's talking about, when they say spread of language, it's also talking about much of the culture that is spreading along with it. So they are basically saying that the entire culture is being spread out, and the native culture is being replaced by this new Indo-European, or in the case of India, the Aryan culture, because they name the Indian branch of these languages as Indo-Aryan, where the other branches have other names. So there have been many theories about the spread of languages. There had been a theory that um, there is a Anatolian theory that it all started in Turkey with agriculture, and then from Turkey it spread into Europe and into India, and this part of the world, and then one branch went up into steppe, and that's how it spread. Uh, because farming, as we know, that uh, there is a good proof that farming had an independent origin in Turkey. We'll talk about that later. But that's one theory that was doing the rounds. There are other theories as well, and one of the out of all these theories, one of the theories is the out of India theory as well, which they say that it's being propounded by nationalists in India, but it has been there for a very long time. It has been there. It was actually the first theory that was there about the spread of languages. When they first found relationship between Sanskrit and all these other languages, they said, okay, this is the homeland of the Indo-European people, and from here it all spread. There were many important, influential people actually from Europe who were saying that in the initial years, but somehow it was absorbed by the later developments into and discarded as a theory. But it has survived over the years, and there are still proponents, and not still. I mean, it is still a very people are still fighting for this theory even today. So it's going on. The debate is still going on. It's not Nothing is settled, and no theory is discarded completely right now, except probably this Western Europe theory I think, is the weakest as of now in this whole debate, and that's the one which is having the weakest legs to stand upon. Anyways. But this whole field of study has been marred by a lot of bad blood and a lot of what do you say, academic um what should I use the word, you know a lot of harassment of researchers, and also it's a very political thing even within the academia. I would say that uh, that nobody is ready to give an inch, and it's not a very open research subject where you can freely share your ideas. And an example of this would be, I would show you this particular paper, or yeah. So there's this researcher called Johanna Nichols. She's based out in US, and she's a linguist, and she once wrote a paper about the spread of the Indo-European languages, and basically what she argued was that the locus of the spread was somewhere east of the Caspian Sea. So if you look at this, she was basically saying that it started maybe somewhere here. At, like, she just gave an linguistic idea of the whole thing, that the theory that made most sense to her about the different languages which are there in Eastern and Northern Europe, and towards this side into Turkey and Iran and elsewhere, this area made the most sense as the locus of the spread of these languages. But she was harassed into doing a partial retraction of the theory that she propounded, and this was all like illogical, because any theory right now, out of all these theories are conjectures and assumptions, but they are so biased against an origin which can show something being spread from Asia, and specifically anything which can fit within out of India model. They're so biased and so angry and so against it that they forced this lady to, just do a partial retraction on this theory. And she then did a partial retraction, and she basically said that, okay, uh, it's a beautiful theory that accounts elegantly for a great deal of the dynamic and linguistic geography of the IE spread, but it conflicts with essential archaeological and etymological facts, which is not true because they don't have any such facts which can counter this. This part is just made up, and it's like a circular argument. You say that, okay, there is no proof for archaeology, there's no archaeological proof, so we don't accept a linguistic theory saying that. And when you go to the actual archaeology part of it, it's on very weak grounds, and then they will quote linguistics to prove their archaeological point. So they will use, while doing archaeology, they will quote linguistics, and when this lady is doing linguistics, they are quoting archaeology to do a partial retraction. And the basically what I would say here is that even if there are some missing gaps in archaeology or whatever, if they are claiming that, they cannot just ask her or just pressurize the researcher to withdraw her theory or whatever. Just let it be, because you don't know. There is no certainty about these linguistic theories right now. So it's just another set of ideas out there. But this is what happened. So this is the whole sort of atmosphere in which this research has been ongoing. So nobody is free of these pressures and all that. Even the current researchers, even those who are doing hard science, I believe, like archaeogenetics, they are um, not completely free of these pressures. And an interesting part is that uh, there has been a very strong alliance between the leftist, Marxist leftist historians of India and many of these Western researchers who benefit from this entire theory, because all their papers on the study of Indian languages and Indian texts and all that, they all are based on this presumption that this entire thing came with some invaders from, and even though they call it migration, it's just a mask to hide behind. It's actually invasion in the with the language of migration. So they're calling it migration, but whatever they mean when they actually do the analysis, they actually mean it like an invasion, like an elite culture coming in and dominating the natives, and basically forcing them to learn their language and culture and all that, which is basically same as an invasion. So it's not like that. It's it's not a migration in the sense that, okay, 10, 20 uh, people, tribal people, which basically they were these steppe people, with respect to the advanced culture that was there in India at the end of the Indus Valley civilization. And they are basically saying that 1020s, they are not basically saying that 1020 tribals came there and so slowly everybody learned their languages and their ways. What they are saying is that 1020 people came and they ruled the other people. They basically sort of dominated the other people, and then they I don't know how they don't realize that the area they are talking about is a subcontinent sized area, which is like from the end of Iran to on the other side to the end of Bengal. That whole area is being told, we are being told that they were uh, people from the steppes who spread those languages in this much area with a very few number of people who came in. Because as we go ahead, we'll see what the genetics is saying about this whole thing. So, anyways, let's move forward. So, what they're basically saying, and if we go into the nitty-gritty of this whole theory, is there were many developments. Let's leave some of the arguments aside which they have about the steppe theory. So, there are a lot of cultures and a lot of archaeological sites and peoples involved in this whole steppe theory, which a lot of it to do with the internal movements from steppe to towards Europe, towards the mainland Europe and elsewhere. So that is one area which itself has a lot of debate going on about it. There are many people who don't agree with most of the things that one group or the other says. So so let's leave that part aside. But for the India theory, for the theory that has to do with India, this is what they are saying. So they are saying that there was this at the end of the third millennium BC, like somewhere around 2000 BC, there was this culture, Andro Novo culture. They call it the Andro Novo culture, and this was formed in the eastern part of the steppes, had some distinct features to it. And the old theory, before the genetic evidence came out, what they were saying was that this BMAC, which is the Bactria margiana archaeological complex in Turan, sort of edge of Iran and Afghanistan, I would say, today's Iran and Afghanistan. So this area was a very well-known culture, and what they were earlier theorizing was that at some point Andronovo ran over the BMAC, and they just they took over BMAC, and the BMAC people then became Indo-Europeanized, and that was the main thrust of the Iranian and Indian languages from there. So here is where the Indians and Iranians split, and the Iranians went their way, the Indians went their way, and that's why this because Indians and Iranians, by the way, are the most related out of all these groups. So they stayed on till the end. That's what this current theory says, or what they try to say in this theory, that Indians and Iranians, and I would agree with them that Indians and Iranians were together till the very end, but just not coming from the Andronovo. They were just here together. But anyways, this is what they were saying, that BMAC was run over, and from BMAC it went into India via Swat, which was basically sort of a highway, because there are archaeological remains in the Swat Valley area, which is in today's Pakistan. So what they are saying is that from BMAC, something came to SWAT, and then from SWAT it went further into, because they have to show some archaeological footprint of these moving, should I call it Aryans, um, into India. But when the research came out, what the research is saying, that the steppe people never, came inside this BMAC area. They found steppe DNA as outliers outside of the main settlements of BMAC, but never inside the main settlements of BMAC. And BMAC ultimately collapsed in 1600 BCE because of many factors, and weather and climate are the main factors why around 2000 BCE onwards many of these cultures collapsed, and it didn't just happen in the Indus Valley or BMAC. It was a sort of a global event, and even the Mesopotamian cultures and others on the west, even they suffered during that era. So there was a climate event at 4000 years ago, which is like 2000 BCE, which caused a lot of upheaval in all these areas. And even I would say even the Andronovo and the steppe cultures would be more mobile during those eras, and that's why they started moving from Andronovo to elsewhere. So that's how probably their genes and those folks showed up at the doorstep of India. But they never entered BMAC. They never captured BMAC. And what we find, what the papers are saying, is that even the Swat Valley samples, they have very little. So what they have done is that they have uh, samples from Andronovo, and then they have genetic DNA samples, the ancient DNA samples from Swat. And what they are saying is that they can see between 2000 to 1000. So they have samples in Swat in around 1000 BC, a little earlier than that or near about that. And they are saying that they find that these samples have ancestry, and not ancestry, admixture, which is like their main component of their DNA is pre-existing, but they have a 10 to 15% input from Andronovo, and it's actually not a male-mediated admixtures that they have, the Swat Valley people. It's actually a female-mediated, which means that these guys intermarried into the females of the Andronovo folks. So, and they are not completely Aryan people, like they are not there, and they are not replaced by these guys. They are their own folks, and they just have an admixture because people move and people intermarry and people do trade, and there are relationships between people. So that's what it shows. And these people, those 1000 BC DNA, are not ancestral to any Indians, which means that we can show uh, that these people, whoever they were, which basically they were Dardic folks. Dardic is a set of languages which is spoken in this area, even in Kashmir. The Kashmiri language is a Dardic language, and they don't contribute DNA to future Indians. There is an admixture similar to what the Swat Valley people have from Andronovo, a similar admix of the steppe DNA is there in rest of the Indians, which ranges from somewhere 0% to 30% the maximum in any group, an average of maybe, I don't know, maybe 15% on an average, uh, which is also, as we will see, is probably challenged or going to be is going to go down, or at least going to go down in the sense that what they are trying to claim right now is that that entire 15-20% average steppe mix that came into India is happened as a singular event to align with their pre-existing notion of that Aryan invasion happening in the 1500 BC time period as said by Max Muller. So what they are saying is that it happened during only during that 2000 to 1500 period. So that's because, and they are giving a reason that after 1500 BCE, um, there was a mixture of East Asian genomes like the China kind of DNA ancestry, which shows up into the DNA of these Andronovo type people over here, and that East Asian mixture we don't find in North Indians and Punjabis and all these people. We find a pure Andronovo pre-admix of the East Asian ancestry, but that's not completely true what they are saying because there are other people. They first of all they have not sampled each and every population that was existing over here in Andronovo after its collapse and so on. So there were, because we know from history that there were other steppe groups that came into India. There were the Shakas, the Kushans, the Huns. So there were many groups who came and then they basically dissolved into the Indian milieu because we know that at least for the Shakas we know that they had their capital in Mathura in UP, and they adopted the Indian ways. They were worshipping Indian gods. So basically, for all practical purposes, they became one of the native people over there, and then they mixed with those people. And probably they were the elites of the society. They were the ruling class. So they mixed more with the existing elites, which could be the Brahmins and other folks in the area. But that's just an explanation I'm giving. But the whole point is that, and Neeraj Rai, the Indian researcher in this area, he has also mentioned it in a couple of his videos that that they have some evidence that they are looking, but because what they're doing now is they're looking at the um, actual Indian mainland DNA. So SWAT is in Pakistan, as I told you, and it's just the starting point of the Indian subcontinent, right? So we don't have any samples from the rest of India, not at least the northern part of India, from any of those eras like the 2000, 1500 BC, 1000 BC, or 500 BC. We still don't have any published material on that, so we don't know when that steppe mixture actually happened in this area, because that is very important because they have to show that that big 30% mix or 20% average mixture happened in one go in 1500 BC, and after that all of the people over here should start showing that admix of the steppe ancestry. So that has not been shown. It's just a conjecture based on this East Asian ancestry coming in this area. So they have to sample more, uh, s- ancient DNA skeletons from here and the skeletons from here for ancient DNA, and then come up with some theory on that. So what Neeraj Rai is saying, that they have evidence, or at least they're claiming that it's not that it came in that 2000 to 1500 BC. They are saying that it spread out. It spread out over a period of say 1500 years in slow sort of trickle from this area to this area, and that's still, after all that trickle, it is still just 15 to 20% of the total admixture in people. And there are folks like with 0% admix, so it's in India residing today. So it's like 0 to 30%. 30 is the max that they have found in any existing population. So that's the whole thing about that. But okay, let's go forward. So another thing, so what happened was that they changed their, and let me also remind people here that they don't have much archaeological backing for any of this. This is what I'm talking right now is purely based on genetics. Okay, what the genetic data is saying and how they are making up the argument. It has no archaeological backing. There is no archaeological proof that any of such migration which changed the culture of the local people happened, and that is why Vasant Shinde and others came out and said that Okay, because the only way they could have justified this language turned in a place as big as India, which is like spreading over from Pakistan to Bengal and even Iran, if you think about it that way, then there is no archaeological proof for that. Their BMAC theory is done, so they showed that BMAC was never penetrated by the steppe people, and BMAC folks were actually migrants from India. So at least one third of the people in BMAC were found to be having Indian ancestry. So not one third, but the total admix that they found into BMAC, which means that BMAC had a 30 more than 30% of ancestry derived from India or from the Indus Valley civilization. So actually BMAC was formed out of the Indus Valley civilization and Iranian people. So it was a mix of the Indians and Iranians, but going from India and Iran into BMAC and forming that civilization. And we have archaeological evidences that they are very interrelated kind of civilizations. So Indus Valley was interacting with BMAC, which existed from somewhere around 2600 BCE to 1600 BCE, that time frame. So it was already Indian and Iranian formed civilization, and it did not impact later day Indians, and it was not run over by the steppe people. So what they are saying now is that they have only one area which they are claiming that these so-called Aryans could have come from, and that one area is this thing called Inner Asia Mountain Corridor. So they are saying that there is this route of trade which existed for a very long period actually, between Central Asia and India, and they are saying that this is the route which they took. So they didn't come directly from here because there was BMAC in between, and they never got through BMAC. So they never penetrated BMAC. They After the collapse of BMAC, they found steppe people mixing with the existing people over here. But that's very natural. Anybody living here and trading, and with the growing mobility of people, with the arrival of wheeled vehicles and fast moving vehicles and domestication of horses and all, uh, this area, so very quickly they started to interact and they started mixing with each other. And but for India there's only one route that can be claimed as that can be hypothesized basically, that led to these folks coming into India, and that is this inner Asian mountain corridor. So what they're saying is that they came, started from here, came all the way here, and then from this area in the end they came down, and then they came into this, and that's what they're claiming. But we don't know whether any of such happened or not, whether any of such the people came. We know that the ancestry, the admix is there, but when it, how much happened and at what time, we are not certain about those things. It's just a assumption right now in all these papers. Okay, we'll come back to this. So there were two papers that came out in on 5th of September, I think. Um, One of them was with this heading: Ancient Harappan genome lacks ancestry from steppe pastoralists or Iranian farmers, right? So um, this was the Shinde et al. Paper with Shinde and Neeraj Rai and many others. They contributed into this paper, and basically this is the paper which came out with the genes for that Rakhi Gadi lady. The Rakhi Gadi is a Harappan site in Haryana, and the oldest, and not the oldest but the largest Harappan site that we have in India and Pakistan combined. So they came up with the DNA of this 4,500-year-old lady, and what they are saying is that the major chunk of this woman's ancestry is related to Iranian Neolithic farmers. So um, Iranian Neolithic farmer, Neolithic is for the Stone Age, like the end, probably the end of the Stone Age, or new, around 6000 BC or so. There are genes from Iranian farmers, and uh, what they are saying is that this lady is related to those Iranian farmers in the way that they have a very ancient common origin, the Iranian people and this Rakhi Ghadi woman. And but they don't have any she doesn't have any admix from the steppe folks, because the steppe folks came after 2000 BC, as they showed in their other paper. So she doesn't have anything from the steppe people, but she is mainly Iranian related, with a slight admix of around 15 to 20% from the Southeast Asian hunter-gatherer type population. So like the Andaman tribal population that we have today, something similar to that. So we can say that kind of ancestry was residing in India, in the maybe the southern part of India, southern and maybe the southern and eastern part of India, and this northwestern part around the Saraswati river and that Haryana, western UP to Punjab area, that part was dominated by this Iran related ancestry, and all the farming and other developments that happened in the Harappan civilization were all native. So that's what they are saying. So they are saying that it's that whole farming and cultural milieu was formed locally. And this is very important because earlier there was a theory and unsaid agreement on a sort of theory that uh, much of this agriculture and technology to India came from the West. Like it came from this fertile crescent. Fertile crescent is like Turkey and beyond. So they said that the farming was invented there, and maybe at some point those guys uh, came to from west to east. Maybe the Iranian people came from west to east. Iranians learnt it from the Anatolians, which is the Turkish people, and then the Iranians came and they came into India and they taught all this, and then this Harappan civilization was formed, and so on and so forth. And then that collapsed, and then the Aryans came, and then they taught you Sanskrit and all, and then that is that. So everything, basically everything from the beginnings of the Harappan civilization to later the Vedic, which they call later, but we don't know. As I told you that we don't know the dates. There are researchers which give a uh, date which may even go to the fourth millennium BCE and so on for the Rig Veda. So we don't know all those. We are not sure of all those dates. We have to do a completely separate research on the dating of those texts, because I think this is all high level conjecture that's going on over here. So, anyways, what this paper is saying, that that lady says, she shows her DNA shows that the Iranians and the Indians, those populations which were living in the Indus Valley and were living in Iran at that time, were related populations, but they were separated at least 12,000 years ago, which from today, which means that around 10,000 BCE or before that, their ancestors separated out. So they separated out into two branches, and one branch went or stayed in Iran. And we don't know the split where it happened, but it could be anywhere from between eastern Iran to northwestern India. It could be any of those. We don't know actually. We need more ancient samples from India to actually get that information. We have some samples from Iran, the oldest sample being from 10,000 BCE, based on which they know that at 10,000 BCE, the person who was living in that Iranian cave did have a related ancestry to this lady of 2500 BCE, Rakhi Gadi, but they were not but the split happened before that. So the split had already happened by then. So, but we don't know where the split happened. Could have been India. It could have been, I don't know, somewhere between India and Iran, but somewhere over there. But they separated out at that time. And then if because they separated out, and because there is no other person coming in, no other human being coming in into India, we can say that all the innovations and all the agriculture and all the technologies that were built by the Harappans and those people were all indigenous, were all done by the local people, and it went on. So it even till modern day, archaeology wise, archaeology clearly says that there is no discontinuity. Even today, the Rakhi Gadi village, the people are still making same kind of pottery and toys as they were making during the Harappan times. And second thing is that this DNA forms the major chunk of the DNA of the modern populations of India. So if you look at the Indian modern population, it has its major ancestry from this Harappan type population, and then some added admixture of those southern Indian HGs. HGs is hunter gatherers. So people who are not doing farming, who are just collecting food, killing animals, collecting food, and living that sort of life. So the Iraqi Gadi lady had only less than 20% of that Hg admix, but the later Indian population has much more of that, and the actually the South Indians have much more of these the South Indian Hgs or Southeast Asian Hg admix than the North Indians. So what we can tell from that is that at some point we can say that the southern edgy, the southern hunter-gatherers were anyways moving upwards because at the time of split from the Iranian folks, when the Iranian ancestry which existed in Iran and this IVC, the Indus Valley Civilization Iranian ancestry, when they split, then they were at that time there was no edgy mix, there was no hunter-gatherer mix in those populations, and after at least 7,000 years or 6,500 years, we find that in this lady it is like 20%. So at some point in time, this HG population moved upwards into the northern lands, and they mixed with this, started mixing, and that mixing went on. And there are some evidences that this mixing started happening around the beginnings has started happening around 4000 BC and so on, and then it went on and on up to the modern era. So that's how the Indians have more, the current Indians have more of that southern edgy admix, and South Indians have much more. So South Indians have probably say, I'll just throw out some figures that is like 45% from the Indus Valley, and then there is a certain admix from the southern East Asian edgy population, the hunter-gatherers, and then a bit of the steppe admix that came on top of all that. So that's that. And North Indians have more of the Indus Valley, and then less of this southern east Southeast Asian Southeast Asian hunter-gatherer population, and then a bit more steppe admix than the southern Indians, and that would purely because of the geographical reasons, because when if you see the map, when folks are from here are interacting and moving southwards, they will first encounter this area. So of course this will be having more admix, and then Shakas and Huns and Kushans and all these guys came, and they basically ruled over this area. So that's pretty self-explanatory why these guys have a bit more of the steppe admix than the southern Indians. Um, okay, moving from there. So this is the bioarchive preprint that they put up over here for a study which was done on the Greater Caucasus population. So Greater Caucasus is, as I told you earlier, is this area. So this whole area. So this was done by Wang et al. Wang is the lead researcher, and then others in his team who were involved in this. And um, the other Rakhigarhi paper was this one, and then the Central Asian and paper which shows the Swat Valley introgression into India is this one. Um, and then this is a paper which this is not peer reviewed and printed yet in some publication, but this is on bioarchive as a preprint, which is like a open place for putting in your preprint for discussions with other researchers. So what they said in this paper is basically that there was mixture of Iranian type folks into steppe during early Bronze Age and fourth millennium BCE basically, and probably earlier as well. So a bit earlier from there as well. So what they are saying is that there was transmission of genes from hair to hair. And the Narsimban et al. Paper, which is talking about South and Central basically, that is also saying that the entire state receive in genetic input populations all along. Did it receive inputs from all the people who were living the south of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and they were mixing with the um, people who are living on the steppes. So that is pretty uh, solid. So they are saying that there was mixture from the southern populations to the northern populations. So that is one thing. And the another area of research which is very important to this entire debate is about the Hittites or the Anatolian branch of Indo-European. So, in this Indo-European theory, one of the oldest split branches, or as they say, it's the oldest split branch, but um, But anyways, let's go on and discuss on that. So there is this group of people called Hittites. Okay, were an ancient group of Indo-Europeans who moved into Asia Minor and formed an empire at Hattusa in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, around 1600 BC. Then it reached heights of its, empire and all that. So these were Indo-European speaking people who were living in modern-day Turkey around 1600 BCE. So we know that at some point these people moved into that area, and the Indo-European languages in Turkey were being spoken till modern, not modern times, but till the CE era, like the post BC, the early CE eras, we had people speaking Indo-European languages. So if the theory is that if the people who started speaking these languages were originally from the steppes, they should be, found, their genes should have been found in Turkey, in some form of admix. But we haven't found any DNA from the steppes in Turkey, not in modern times and not in ancient times. And we have a comprehensive set of, uh, skeleton samples from Turkey, right from the ancient period till the Bronze Age and later, and even during the Hittite era, we had a lot of samples searched, and we never found steppe DNA in them. So basically, that denies the premise that steppe is the original source for these uh, people, and so steppe is the source of the Indo-European languages as the starting point. So that cannot be, because the Hittites and the Turkish or Anatolian people don't have this DNA, this gene, so they never moved there. And if they didn't move, then who moved, and who brought that language over there? So that's a big question. So there was this paper published last year by Damgard et al, and what they said is basically that, okay, so they are saying that we find no evidence of steppe ancestry in Bronze Age Anatolia from when Indo-European languages are attested there. Thus, in contrast to Europe, early Bronze Age Yamnaya-related migrations had limited direct genetic impact in Asia. So what they're saying is that there is no the people who they tested, they had no evidence of the steppe ancestry. So basically, they were, in a way, nutshell, they said that that cannot be the starting point of the Indo-European languages. And they made this observation about India. So our results also suggest distinct migrations bringing West Eurasian ancestry into South Asia before and after, but not at the time of Yamnaya culture. So basically, what they are saying is that the West Eurasian is you can say the Iranian related ancestry mainly, and later on the steppe type ancestry as well. But the Iranian ancestry from this latest paper from Shinde et al, we know that it was already there in India, at least in 1000 BCE and perhaps earlier. So that is a debate whether the split happened within South Asia or India, and the people, one set of people moved towards Iran, or the split happened somewhere in between or towards the Iranian side and folks. But the split happened around 10,000 BCE and was already there in India for a very long time. And from archaeology and other fields, we know from Mehergarh and all that they were already doing, started agriculture at 7,000 BCE or so, and doing a lot of things, and there were people there, and the likely the same people who had this Iranian related ancestry. So that's that. So steppe cannot be the ultimate source because there is no steppe admix or a steppe DNA mix in the Anatolian branch or Anatolian people. So that's a big gap that they have for that theory. That's the, what should I say, Achilles heel of, because they can ignore everything else. People can ignore everything else. They can just say that, okay, there is some mixture of steppe folks in India, so probably that brought the languages. We don't want to care about material culture and pottery and all that, and everything else may be similar, but the language certainly came. We don't care, you know. But if that is the case, then there is no DNA for Anatolia. There is no steppe admix in Anatolia. Then if you are arguing for a DNA based, a final result on this whole debate, then you have to go the same way for Anatolia as well. So Anatolia doesn't have the steppe mix. So then the thing started somewhere else. But the point is that we know that there was a Iranian farmer or Iranian ancestry related mix that happened in Anatolia somewhere in the Neolithic age, around 6,000 BCE or so, 6,000 or 7,000 BC, around that period. There was a mix of Iranian folks into Anatolia. And we also know that we have evidence of Indian population, the Indus Valley population mixing into Iran um, some time back during the Harappan era at least. We know that we have found Indus Valley samples, skeletons in their sites, in their archaeological sites. So which basically it gives an indication that there was an east to west migration happening all the time. There was this interaction corridor basically between all these places, and if they are the original source of the Indo-European language and they were mixing with the steppe people throughout, then that is how the language spread from the southern sedentary cultures, which were agricultural people who were doing all the innovations, who were settled and were basically innovating on technology and stuff, and they were the people who are better claimants for the Indo-European language. It could be I mean, the problem is that the entire theory is not thrashed out right now. It's everything is in a sort of a flux, so we don't know, but it could be, it's more likely, appearing to be more and more likely that it was the southern Indian, Iranian, and Anatolian people who were interacting with each other for a very, very long time. So another line of evidence is the Zebu cattle, which is the Indian, basically Indian cattle, which was around 2000 BCE. It started showing up in Anatolia and Iran and Mesopotamia and all those places. So the Zebu cattle became, very prevalent over there around 2000 BC. So even if some people will say that, okay, it's not a big human migration, it's just a trade of cattle happening, but then it shows that there were very strong linkages between these people. They were already interacting over huge spaces of land and doing all this trade and all, and they just couldn't be, their languages couldn't just be wiped out, the entire Iran and entire, that belt of Middle Asia by this small steppe admix, which shows no archaeological impact over there. It couldn't even capture BMAC. So, that is the big Achilles heel over there. The more convincing argument, more and more likely, especially after these DNA studies, is that the southern cultures, the southern meaning the south of Black Sea and Caspian Sea cultures, they were the harbingers of Indo-European languages into Europe. And at some point in time, by interacting with these steppe people who are nomads, who are trading with these guys, and who are picking up, language and vocab and other things from these settled, basically very advanced cultures in India and Iran. So that's the whole crux of the argument. So this is what we were talking about Hittites. There are other things as well. There is this, evidence of, for example, other people writing about it, like this article from Dr. Semenenko, who is telling about the trees in early Rig Veda and how all those trees are all Indian native trees, and from the very early phases, these people are aware of forest and are interacting with these forests, and the only trees and the only sort of flora and fauna that they know is all Indian native. So they don't remember, if they were from those grasslands, they would not be interacting with these forests so much, and so on and so forth. So this is like one line of argument. There are many such people writing about these sort of things, but ultimately, if nobody is ready to look at archaeology and other things, and they just want to stick to their preconceived notions of somebody, of a group of people coming in at 1500 BCE, then you can't do, and just equating it with that sort of semi admix, a little bit of admix from these steppe people, which we till now don't know whether they came in a group. It's yet to be, it's an assumption, and our own researchers are saying that that assumption is wrong, and then future papers are going to dispute that. So um, so we don't know what to how to convince the other side, or how to convince any side for that matter. People are so invested in this whole thing, that we can't say much about it. Um, Another thing that is discussed a lot is about this R1A1 haplogroup. So R1A1 haplogroup is basically a basically a male ancestry marker, which um is common between a lot of the European, basically East European Slavic population mainly, and also in bit in rest of the Europe and very prevalent in India. So what they are saying is that okay, this Y chromosome, chromosome haplogroup is common between India and Europe. So this is probably what is indicating the coming on of, and many people just call it an Aryan gene. I don't know why that is done because first of all there is no Aryan gene. There is nothing like that. It's not a racial thing, and they just equate it for they just basically use it in popular blogosphere and elsewhere. They use it as a stand-in for people who brought Indo-European languages into India, and they just say that that's the Aryan gene. But the thing is with this R1A1 is that they have got a sample in steppes around around 5000 BCE or somewhere around that, um, where they found one skeleton with this RZ645, which is one of the sub in the R1A1 tree. It is a it's found at around split around 5400 years before present. So um, which is like somewhere around. So this is the whole reason. So let me just first explain what the tree thing is in this Y haplogroup. So this tree is basically is denotes that these chromosomes, they undergo certain mutations over a period of time. And with each mutation, you will find a different set of branch forming out of it. And basically, the more number of years that you have, the more number of splits will happen, and the more diverse subset is R1A or haplogroup or any other will form. What they are saying is that European evidence, the DNA uh, is is a split which is ancestral to the Indian split. So Indians basically have the Z93, right? They have the Z93 form of R1A1, and what they have found in the stepes is RZ645, which is an ancestral form of this RZ93. So they are saying that okay, we have the ancestral already found in the ancient record of the steppe people, and Indians have very prevalent RZ93, and especially with the people with the more steppe admix and so on. That's their argument, and then so they are saying that okay, then these guys brought this into India, and that's how it spread. But what we are hearing from our own researchers who are going to come out with a paper on R1A1, and there have been other papers in the past which talk about a indigenous origin of R1A1, which means that the R1A1 gene was ultimately formed in India, and it has its origin over here. But all those studies are based on modern DNA. But what we heard the latest from Neeraj Rai is that they have 10,000 samples of various groups of Indians. So the earlier sampling was very limited. So they sampled a very little subset of the population in India. And India, as you know, is a huge um, mix of various ethnicities and all that. So they didn't sample everybody to do these studies earlier. So now they have sampled 10,000 people from all kinds of population, tribals and forest dwellers and even modern hunter-gatherers and all that. So um, what they are saying is that they find so much diversity in India. They find this whole, so it basically looks like a star, right? This whole expansion of this R1A1 haplogroup. So it splits into various branches. It forms a sort of a star. Uh, so they are saying that there's finding a big star-like formation. Yeah, means they are finding a huge diversity of R1A1 in India in various groups, even the tribals, even the forest dwellers and all that, which basically means that the origin of that R1A1 lies in India because the diversity in Europe is nothing as compared to what they are seeing in India. So why the diversity is less in Europe, which means that it came one of the branch of R1A1 went into Europe and then it diversified over there. But that diversity is not something that can be compared to what we have in India because it has more diversity in India, which means that it was longer in India. It was before it went out, it was already there in India, and it has more diverse tree formation in India. So that basically tells you that the origin is in India. So that paper is going to come out in a few months. So that's another thing. That's a huge talking point for some of these steppy folks. That okay, R1A1, that's the final proof. Okay, but that's not the case actually. That's going to be debunked pretty soon. We still need ancient DNA though. I mean, it would be the final closing thing on the R1A1 if we get a pre-2000 BCE R1A1 gene. But the point is that we don't have those many samples from India yet. Our climate is not very conducive to saving the DNA, and more than that, I think we are not putting in enough money in the research. The Indian government should put in more money, and I heard one of the researchers say that we haven't even excavated 2% of the skeletal material or this kind of archaeological material that would help us in extracting old DNA, ancient DNA, and help us with all these studies. I think that's an area that we should really concentrate on. It's the cutting edge of archaeogenetic research right now. Um, but anyways, moving forward, that's what we have on R1A1. So the modern DNA study will yet again prove an indigenous origin of R1A1. But if we can get a sample, ancient sample with R1A1, that would be even better. Okay. Going forward, just wanted to take you through this some of the points that Neeraj Rai raised after this study came out. So see, he's saying that it is also possible now that the Neolithic in Western Iran and Anatolia could have had admixture from South Asia rather than vice versa as earlier believed, right? So what it means is that, as I told you, that Steppe does not explain Anatolia. Steppe influx does not explain Anatolia. They Anatolian people don't have a mixture from steppe, but they have a Iranian like admixture in their Neolithic, and Iran of course has related ancestry to India, and then there is evidence that even later on there were migrations from India towards Iran. So what he's saying is that with future research we can probably show this thing that the Neolithic, that is the end of the probably the Stone Age period, when we started, farming, humans started moving towards farming, is is triggered by people from India or people who innovated farming in India and then went westwards. And there's no proof for that right now. So it's to be clear, but it can be now hypothesized that there was a migration. There is a Iranian related input in Anatolia, that's for certain. So even if India and Iran were sharing ancestry and there was a migration from Iran into Anatolia, that explains the Hittite languages and all that over there. So that's one thing that he said, and he's also saying that there was substantial migration of people from the Harappan civilization into eastern Iran and Central Asia. So that's already proven with these studies that there was an out migration to eastern Iran and Central Asia. And he's saying that you can also further show probably in future that in western Iran and Anatolia we could also have had admixture from South Asia. There are subtle hints. I'm not going to talk about them, but in previous studies there are hints that the people in Anatolia and Western Iran, they got an input from the east because they had that Southeast Asian hunter-gatherer, that sort of ancestral South Indian, those South Indian tribal kind of genes, which were very little in quantity in the Rakhi Gadi sample, but still uh, they showed up. So if they are 17% in that sample, and if earlier they were just say 5 or 8%, in earlier times during the Neolithic, or even less than that, or maybe say 10%, then if those people went and mixed towards Iran and Anatolia, it will just show up as a very minor percentage. But if it just shows up a little, which means that because the rest of the ancestry matches with that of the Iranians, so you can't differentiate between the Iranian. The only way of differentiating is that if it is showing a little bit of that South Indian hunter-gatherer tribal kind of ancestry, even a little bit, then you can show that it came from further east. So that's the area that we are moving towards, right? So that is what. And then he again tweeted recently, Neeraj Rai, that that Aryan migration and Aryan invasion will soon be hugs with Aryans, because see, they are building this argument about the maximum steppe admix being 30% in some groups, right? So what he's saying that in 2020, so they have some data on during that 2000 BC to 1 to 0 BC transact, that 2000 year period. They have ancient data from samples, especially from that Sanoli study, Sanoli archaeological digging that happened recently, where they found a chariot buried along with a coffin of a king-like person, where they found swords and helmets and all that. So they have collected, I believe, skeletons from there, and they must be taking out the DNA of those folks. So there's something in those studies which probably is telling them that there wasn't much mix from these steppe folks, or could be just 10% during that time transact, that 2000 to 1500 time transact, or 2000 to 1000 BC time transact, that they are very adamant on, that all that steppe came in that area. But if we can show that with the ancient DNA that that was not the case, then it even weakens this steppe theory even more, because Vedas cannot be fit after whatever they do, they cannot fit it after 1000 BC. And anyways, even today, it cannot be done after 1800 BCE, because we know that the Aryan, sorry, the Rig Vedic people were Bronze Age people. They did not know iron, that we are certain about. It's not there. May- they could be from the Copper Age, not even the Bronze Age, because the metal, know metal, but it's not certain that the metal they are talking about is bronze. It could just very well be copper, and I believe it is copper that they are talking about in their text. But anyways, the iron workings, we have evidence from the Ganga valley, that the iron working was already being done there at 1800 BC. Like proper iron workings were being done in the Ganga Valley at 1800. So the Iron Age onset already happened, and Rig Veda is aware of all that geography. So those people are aware of all that geography, but they don't know iron. So they are pre 1800 BCE for sure. Based on that, that's a published paper, by the way, about that iron workings in the Ganga Valley at 1800 BCE. So so if there is no steppe mix at that time period, and after 1800 BCE, there's already iron workings there, then it is also a pretty straightforward thing that, nobody came with anything. The people, the Rig Vedic people were pretty old and ancient, and probably pre-urban phase of the Vedic civilization. That could be a very, you know, a big possibility. But we'll go into that later. But for now, this is what we are concentrating on when this admix happens. So we are concentrating on two things. When this admix into Indian population of the steppe groups happened, whether it was more towards the Shaka and Han and Kushan era when these guys came, and they are all historical times. So they have no bearing on the Indo-European language coming into India. They came in when we already know that Buddha and all and were already there. So so that's one thing. So he's also shared about this 4,000-year-old chariot at Sanoli, which is putting India in at par with Mesopotamia and Greece and all that. So we have all this. So one of the main arguments for the Aryan invasion theory was that these guys were bringing in horses and chariots, which were like superior to the local culture who didn't know of these things, and so they conquered and ruled over them. Right? This was one of the main arguments. But we already found this chariot last year. It's a pretty good one. It doesn't have spoked wheels, so they are now talking about that. Okay, this is not a true chariot. It doesn't have spoked wheels and all that. I mean, it's just egregious, those arguments. It's just stupid, I would say. That was the king's chariot. It was probably a more decorated one. They have those bronze studs on it. Let me just see if I have it was probably a Suryavanshi king's chariot, because what they are saying is that, so if you look at its this picture, let's look at this one. So if you look at this picture, see what they're saying is that these are copper studs. So it's basically making an like sun's rays going outwards. This is the wheel. So these are suns, they're denoting sun's rays, and it's going on these concentric circles of triangular copper studs. So they're making sun's rays on the wheel for the king's chariot. So you can read more about this. You can find the links for this Sanoli study and all. A note, it's the proper publication has not happened from ASI, but they have published some of the things about this as they have released them as notes. So you can look at that. Another interesting thing is about this group called Mitannis. So Mitannis also like Hittites were an Indo-European group which were at some point in time ruling northern Iraq, area around northern Iraq. A lot of people say that Tutankhamun's mother was a prince or was a princess from the Mitanni kingdom. So there are evidences, like there are theories about that as well. And some of the people just it's sort of a propaganda. I don't know whether it's a propaganda theory or what the reality is, but some people say that Tutankhamun also had that R1A1 gene. So we don't know how it got there or if that is true or not. But anyways, that's into the conspiracy theory part of it. But anyways, these Mitanni people, we know for sure that they were speaking a language which was not very diverged from the Indian Sanskrit. Like it's like all classical Sanskrit. A lot of researchers say that they were using classical Sanskrit in their treaties and all that. So they were Indo-European ruling elite who were ruling as people who were not speaking Indo-European language, were not speaking Sanskrit language, but they were ruling that area. So that's another group of people who we don't know how they got there. So as you can see that they are saying that they had a Indo-Aryan super state in their language, and their names were in the treaty they were using. They were discussing Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and all these people specific to the later Vedic age. And they were ruling there around 1700 BCE or something around that. So 1400 BCE, right? So 15 to 1300. So if we can get a sample like a DNA sample from Mitannis, somehow if we get a sample from there and if we are able to extract DNA from a Mitanni sample, that would be a pretty straightforward answer to this whole debate. That will just settle this debate in one day. Because if they have they are speaking a language which is we know it is very closely related to the Indian Sanskrit language. So if they don't have a steppe mix, if they have more of a Iranian related sort of Indian type of ancestry, um, then we are almost certain that, we know from where they came and what was there before that. So that will just close this case. So that's one area to look forward to, but it's lying in that Iraq sort of territory, which is not a very stable part of the world, and we don't know when this kind of research can happen. Maybe someday someone will get a good one, and we'll learn more about that. So that's that. Then there is this has been this talk in the archaeological circles about this Middle Asian interaction sphere. So based on all this archaeological data, archaeologists now know that there was a huge amount of interaction. It's like nobody was living in isolation in this part of the world, at least, and not even even in the southern steppes. And also there was huge interaction between these Indus Valley people and Iranian people and these Anatolian and Near East folks in this general northern Iraq area and eastern Turkey area and all that. So they were already interacting and sharing ideas and all that. And the linguistic theory is I think of today are very simplistic in or even these language spread theories are very simplistic in the sense they're just assuming that something is going from here to there and just completely replacing the languages. But it didn't happen like that. A lot of the ideas just spread as loan words, Like for example, if some word is invented, if something is invented in India, like for to like look at today's example. A set of people invented the computer, and now the whole world call this thing computer. By and large, they have adopted that word, which was the original inventor's word, the culture which invented that, and everybody has adopted that. And the same thing was sort of going on in that era as well. Somebody invented, say, the wheel or chakra, and people just took that as a word and just started using variants of that for various things. So there was a lot of interaction going on, and probably this whole area acted as a conduit for there was probably no at any point a very evolved proto-Indo-European language at any point in time. There was like just subsets of those languages existing everywhere, and they probably spread in chunks from one area or the other, and then ultimately from steppe onwards, we know how they went into the rest of the Europe and all, and probably a branch went from Turkey to the Greek islands and all. So that is another possibility. There is a linguistic theory also about that, about the Greco-Armenian Aryan theory, where they say that the Armenian dialect of Indo-European is somewhere in between the Greek dialect and the Indian dialect. So could be. We don't know. I mean, more research is needed in that area. But this is one area where um, a lot of people, a lot of archaeologists are coming to this sort of realization that probably this is where the cradle of the Indo-European civilizations lie, in this particular area, and that from here it went upwards. So that's it for today, I think. I don't know whether it went a bit longer than I intended or not, but I've tried to cover up in short what is going on, what the international arguments are, the people who are for the steppe theory, what they are saying, what the other side is trying to say, where the studies stand, and where we are with all of this. So basically, and I'll just summarize with what Vasant Shinde and Neeraj Rai and other folks said about the death of the Aryan invasion theory. So they are saying that based on collective evidence, they are saying that all that based on the collective evidence, that the amount of replacement of the population that was needed for the language to completely flip in that big an area, they are not seeing that. They are basically seeing a majority chunk of population deriving their ancestry from the existing Indus Valley people, and the later admix of steppe, like for trade, and we don't know for what reasons. Or there were several explanations for all that. We know historical facts that Shakas and these guys came. We have no need, and there is no, and combined with that, there is no archaeological proof in any break in the culture. There is no archaeological evidence of any discontinuity in the culture. These chariot theory is demolished. We have ancient DNA. It's not published yet, but it was mentioned by Neeraj Rai that we have ancient DNA of horses found in Rajasthan at around 2300 BCE. So we already had the horses in this civilization. We already had the chariot in this civilization. We already know that they invented iron in 1800 BCE in the Ganga Valley. So if they invented iron, that's a major leap in technology. And a Bronze Age people cannot fight an iron wielding people, right? So a lot of these things come together to which on the basis of which they are saying. So it's on evidence basis they are saying that the Aryan theory does not hold. It does not hold. It cannot be sustained. There is no way that it can be sustained. So, but the only question remains then, how did the Indo-European languages spread into Europe? Or how do these people speak, these two groups of folks speak related language? So for that, we are having this discussion about the out of India theory, or probably, out of India, Iran theory, I would say that maybe the area was spread out, but maybe the ultimate origin lied in India, or maybe it lied in eastern Iran. We don't know. I mean, we'll have to do more research on that. But this is the general area, I would say, which is the original homeland, or sort of the original homeland of these people. They were living here for a very long time. They developed a lot of technologies here independently of this fertile crescent area. And then we have introgression of Iranian type people into Anatolia. The same type of ancestry also explains people. Steppe people have a big chunk of their ancestry derived from Iranian type people. So, and then later on, BMAC, we know for when BMAC was formed by the Indus Valley people and Iranians collectively, and these people were interacting with all these steppe people, and we know that this was the more dominant culture over here. The BMAC folks were more dominant, and they were transferring more knowledge to the steppe nomads. So we know all that because it was a farming culture, more stable, more rich, and was passing on more knowledge to the nomads. And the nomads then later on formed these groups. These steppe groups formed the Scythians and these Shakas and the Sarmatians of later age, who then went backwards westwards into Europe and Eastern Europe, and they ruled there, and they were ultimately absorbed by the Slavic and Balto-Slavic people over there. So we know we have a way of explaining away the close linkages of the Slavic people also with the Indian Indo-Aryan or Iranian type of languages, because it was a, and everybody, most of the people agree that Balto-Slavic is a very later phenomena. It came very late, probably after in the CE era, in the early CE era, in the past 2000 years, those languages were formed in their current shape and form, right? So which means that they took a lot of influences from this BMAC and Iranian, Indo-Iranian area, which was already Indo-Iranian. It didn't happen because of the steppe influx. It was already Indo-Iranian, and they took all this westwards, and that's how those some of the loans over there could be explained away. So there's a lot of um, theories doing the rounds, and but we would need more stuff and more research in this area to finally come to a conclusion. But I agree with Vasant Shinde and the other researchers in India and elsewhere who are saying that that this theory, this Aryan invasion theory or the Aryan migration theory is no longer sustainable. Okay, so thank you for listening, and any questions you can just write below. Thanks, guys.